Ever since I came home from China, there's been something on my mind. The China I experienced often didn't match the China I kept hearing about. After 4 years of in China, learning Chinese, and traveling across the country, I think there's a conversation we need to have. Why is there such a gap between a China people actually experience and a China we so often hear about? China is not a simple place. It's a country with incredible achievements, serious challenges, and contradictions that don't always fit neatly in how we talk about it from the outside. I also have a PhD in history, and I'm from rural Louisiana, which is very different from China's big cities. While my research wasn't focused on China, historical training teaches you to ask certain questions. What sources are we using? What perspectives are we missing? Are we sometimes only seeing one part of a much larger picture? After 4 years living and working in China, learning Chinese, and traveling through different parts of the country, those questions stay with me. Because the first thing that challenged my assumptions about China wasn't something I read in a report or saw on the news. It was what I experienced when I began living there and started seeing the country for myself. And it all started in a place that would completely change my perspective. I arrived in Wuxi, a city most people outside of China have never heard of. Not Beijing, not Shanghai, just an ordinary Chinese city by Chinese standards. And that was part of what surprised me. It wasn't the capital or one of the cities most foreigners think about first when they think of China, but it had subway lines under construction, high-speed rail access, and a skyline that looked nothing like I'd grown up around. What really struck me was how convenient and cheap it was to get around. Ordering food, catching a cab, riding the metro. All of it was fast, easy, and cost almost nothing. This wasn't the showcase China. This was a baseline, and that was the first crack in what I thought I knew about China. The more I traveled, the clearer it became. Wuxi wasn't an exception. Cities like Nanjing, Chengdu, and Zhengzhou all had equally impressive infrastructure. It wasn't just one city. It was part of a much larger pattern, not a handful of cities. These weren't the cities that usually come to mind in Western discussions about China. They were ordinary cities that people had lived their daily lives, which raised an obvious question for me. Just how much had actually been built and how fast. And that was when I started noticing something bigger. The surprise wasn't just one city. It was how much had been built across the country. It wasn't just landmarks or the famous cities. It was the transportation networks, the high-speed rail, the way even ordinary cities were connected. Traveling through China, I kept noticing how new everything looked. Roads, stations, entire subway lines, built and opened what felt like no time at all. A trip that would have meant a full day of driving back home was a 2-hour train ride there, and the train showed up on time. Seeing that made me start wondering why this side of China really made it into the conversation back home. So here's a question that started forming for me. When we talk about China, are we sometimes focusing so hard on certain issues that we miss everything else going on? People studying China from a distance often focus on things that are less visible. Economic trends, demographics, political systems, long-term challenges. People who travel through or live in China tend to notice what's right in front of them. The cities, the infrastructure, everyday life. Are we sometimes looking at different sides of the same country? That's the question this whole video is trying to work through. Neither way of looking at China is wrong, but there's a real difference between studying a country and experiencing one. Neither is automatically better. Both are necessary. Living somewhere gives you access to things that are hard to capture from a distance. Some of what I heard was ordinary complaining. People telling me how crowded certain cities felt, or how much they had to work overtime. But just as often, they were proud of how safe it was, and how much progress they'd seen in their own lifetimes, like new developments transforming neighborhoods right in front of them. That kind of pride doesn't really show up in a policy report, and that gap between what gets reported and what people actually feel is worth digging into. This shift in perspective sets up what first-hand experience really adds. Learning Chinese was a huge part of that first-hand experience for me. It let me have conversations I never would have had otherwise, and see China as a place where real people live their actual lives, not just a headline. What stood out was how happy and curious people were to meet a foreigner in their city. Many were friendly, eager to practice English or ask about life in the United States, and some told me they had a positive impression of Americans. Talking directly in Chinese revealed additional insights, like how people complained about new rules or policies, but followed them anyway, and how proud they were of China's stability compared to what they saw in foreign news. These kinds of everyday exchanges brought everything to life. This is where the limits of data become clear. Someone looking at China's infrastructure from outside might focus on the costs, the debt, whether it pays off long term, which are all fair questions. Someone traveling through China sees something else, a high-speed rail network actually running on time, ordinary people using systems that would have been unimaginable a generation ago, cities that feel alive and functional every single day. Both are looking at something real. The hard part is fitting those two realities together, the numbers on a page versus a lived experience on the ground. None of that came from a spreadsheet, though. It came from sitting down and actually talking to people in a language they didn't have to translate for me. Those conversations brought the data to life in ways no report ever could. Here's a factor people underestimate: language. Well, most of your information about a country comes through translation. You're getting a version of reality that's already passed through someone else's interpretation. That doesn't make translation useless. It's necessary for a country this size and this complex. But language isn't just converting words. It's context, culture, the way people actually communicate. Learning Chinese changed what I had access to. Not just what people said, but how they thought about things. I wasn't just visiting and getting a version of China designed for visitors. I was living there, working there, and able to have real conversations without anything getting filtered in between. And I think that's part of why first-hand impressions and outside analysis can diverge so much. Sometimes the disagreement isn't about the facts. It's about the context nobody translated, which brings up a bigger question. Why does this gap exist in the first place? So why does this gap exist? Why can someone live in China and walk away with one impression, while someone studying it professionally focuses on something else entirely? Part of it is just scale. China has over 1 billion people, huge regional differences, and a political and economic system very different from most Western countries. No single person, researcher, journalist, business person, traveler, sees the whole thing. They're all looking from different angles, asking different questions. I saw that kind of thing constantly. High-speed rail connecting cities. Most people outside of China couldn't even name. Families boarding trains that ran on time. Everyday life moving through systems that felt completely normal there. And I kept thinking, why isn't this the story that people hear? But first-hand experience gives you something hard to replace. Being there, speaking the language, watching how people actually live. That's information a spreadsheet doesn't carry. And that's really what this comes down to for me. How we understand places we haven't experienced ourselves. And that's something I think about a lot, especially coming from Louisiana. So this is where growing up in Louisiana helps me more than my PhD does. I know what it looks like when a place gets written about by people who have never been there, flattened into a stereotype, reduced to one headline story. Rural America gets that treatment all the time. China gets it too, just in the other direction. Seeing that happen in both rural America and China changed the way I look at how places are understood from the outside. People are often measuring different things. Someone studying China through economics or geopolitics naturally focuses on risk, debt, demographics, political tension. What happens next? Someone traveling through China focuses on what's immediately visible, the infrastructure, the cities, the people they actually meet. Both are real parts of China. The challenge isn't picking a side, it's holding both at once. After 4 years living in China, I don't think China is a disaster story. It has faced real challenges, but the scale of what China has accomplished is impossible to ignore. My goal here wasn't to hand you a conclusion. It was to get you asking better questions than the ones you started with. So if you've been to China, did your experience match what you expected before you arrived? Let me know in the comments. And thanks everybody for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I have many more videos coming just like this one. And thanks again everybody for watching. I'll see all of you for next time.